All right. I feel we're a little lopsided tonight. All right, guys. If you haven't already, go ahead and share tonight's Bible study on Facebook. Invites people to watch online. How is everybody? Good. I'm good. What'd you say? Hot. It is warm. It is warm, but I'll take it. All right. Does anybody have any prayer requests before we get going tonight? Yeah, John. Yeah, let's remember John's grandparents. Beth. Yeah, remember Tom. Yeah, Beth. Yes. Yeah, so remember Roxanne's daughter, Kiera, they're taking her to UK right now, just some issues with the pregnancy, possibly going to have to deliver early. Also remember Tom Biddle and Jennifer. Tom has been having some heart issues, and he's also got some lung issues, and so right now they're trying to figure out how they can get him to be an open heart candidate. So he goes on Wednesday for another test on his lungs to hopefully get to where he can have some surgery on his heart to deal with some blockages. So they're just kind of overwhelmed right now. They spent a lot of the last few days in the hospital, but they could certainly covet your prayers today. So, yeah, Sammy. Okay, so Tom Sparks is having some heart issues. We remember our own Allie Jude, and you have a monitor on right now, right, on her heart, just checking some things out for her as well. So just pray for answers for them. Anybody else? Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah, Hope Oxford, that's been February for a long time. Anyway, he had to undergo another knee surgery for a young person who hurt in soccer, and now whatever happened didn't work in the repair, and so they should have another one.
Okay, so remember Hope Oxford. Anybody else? Carter got his license today, so remember, no, pray for us. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Pray for our bank account. But no, I'm excited for him. But, I know, but I did tell him after school. I was like, give me my keys, and he's like, why? I said, because I don't have to let you drive anymore, so you get hours. I'm driving my car home. Yeah. So, all right, we want to remember our newest addition to our church family over there, Esther May. Can't wait till we get to meet her. But you remember Becca and Forrest and Josiah and the whole family. Yeah. Selah, yes. We got a bunch of. We got 2 new ones, and we got a bunch more on the way. I know. How old is? 3 days? About 4 days? Yeah. So we got 2 babies under 3 weeks old here in the church right now. So. All right. Anybody else? Any unspoken requests this evening? Quite a few. All right. Darren, will you open us up with a word of prayer?
We want to thank you for all the blessings that you've given us. And we pray that we gather here and study your word and a deeper understanding. Lord, we be with all the prayer requests that are written up here today, Lord, all spoken and unspoken. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. All right, so we are in Exodus 17, and so we've just gotten out of the Israelites getting manna from heaven in the wilderness and quail in the mornings, God providing their needs, their bread and their meat. And we see this has been an ongoing kind of repetitious thing. Right before that, they were like, we don't have any water, and God gives them water, and then he brings them to this land. And remember, every time he does this, seemingly, when he answers their prayers and provides for them, what is he really doing? What is he really putting them through when he's giving them these things? He's testing them, right? And so too often we think of the gift as the end, but really the gift is the beginning. The gift is the test to see what we're going to do with this. Okay? I told him not to do that to you, but he did it. So actually, I didn't tell him that, but I thought it. She's going to be testing him later. I have a feeling. All right, and so now they've received this manna from heaven, and remember they called manna. What is it? Right? They didn't know what it was. And so he provides this for them for how long? for 40 years, for an entire generation, the entire time they were in the wilderness, right? And it's really interesting because that generation is the majority of which died off before they ever made it to the promised land. That generation was the ones who were wicked and disobeyed. There was an entire generation of kids who had not been circumcised until they got to the promised land for different reasons. And it was God basically waiting out these adults and basically almost like an act of attrition to get rid of the wicked amongst them so that the righteous could go into the promised land, which again I think is foreshadowing of what he's doing in this world as well. All right, so we are in chapter 17. We just finished with them, God telling them to save some of the manna and put it where? We know they're going to put it in the Ark of the Covenant as a reminder, as a testimony to what God has done for them. And so now we find ourselves in chapter 17. So it says, all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin or Sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. So they move out. So all these people of Israel, remember, we're not talking about like a little family in a minivan. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about like 1 million people, literally 1 million people, right? I don't know if you saw this or not the other day. I just saw a picture of it, but Lady Gaga, she put on a free concert for people, which cool, good for her. It was in another country, but there was 2 million people on the beach watching this concert. 2 million people, like just lining the beach, right, watching this concert. And that's hard for us to even fathom. It's hard to fathom that amount of people, right? But yet, like we go out to Apple Day or even Hillbilly Days or whatever, and there's like thousands of people at these things. Still, like that's a drop in the bucket to 2 million people, right? So just imagine all of these people are moving out. So when they say we don't have water, they don't mean like there's not a couple of bottles. You know what I'm saying? Like that you need water for an entire civilization to feed these people. Think about how many quail died in that 40 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, so there's a lot of people. So it's no small feat for this entire group to move. But it says they moved in stages. And so what we're going to see here is this actually mentions it in the book of Numbers, because the book of Numbers is called Numbers because it numbers all the people as they went into the wilderness and came out of the wilderness. Like they're keeping up with all the people. That's why it's called Numbers. But it recounts this journey. And so here's the 2 places that they stayed at. So in Numbers 33, verses 12 through 14, it says, and they set out from the wilderness of Sin, okay, or Sin. That's where they were. Like, that's where they got all of the manna, etc. And they camped at Dopka. That's definitely not how you pronounce that, but that's how I just did. And they set out from Dopka, and they camped at Alush. Right? So there's 2 places right there that they stayed at, right? Because Rephidim is here, Sinai's here, and so they're stopping along the way. It's kind of like when we take the kids on a trip, unless we can leave at like 11 o'clock at night and drive through the night while they sleep, we have to stay somewhere along the way. Like it just doesn't happen, especially if it's like a 14-hour trip or something. You find a place along the way you want to stay. That's essentially what's happening here. This group of people is going and they're camping at different places along the way to get there. And so it says, and they set out from Alush, and then they camped at Rephidim, where there was no water for the people to drink. Okay, so we see these different places that they're staying along this way. Okay, that was leading them up to Rephidim, right? So they're to this place. All right, so first verse there, they left Sin, camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for them to drink. So therefore, what do you think the people are going to do? They're going to grumble and complain, right? And I think it's interesting that in the New Testament we're told not to argue and complain about anything, right? I think God's just tired of it. Like, I'm done. And so it says do nothing, everything without arguing or complaining. But so they get there and they begin to grumble with Moses and say, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" Remember, this is exactly what happened last time. He was like, "You're arguing with me." He's like, "But you're not arguing with me. Who are you arguing with? You're complaining against God, not against me. I didn't do this to you, right?" And so he's like, "Why do you test God?" And so let's think about this for just a minute. All the times that they've complained so far, right? Now remember, they have been crying out to God for over 400 years. 400 years as a people. That's twice as long as our country has existed. Right? Think about that for a second. twice as long as our entire history as a country. They've been crying out for God for freedom, right? So then God starts doing it, and what's the response? I don't like how you're doing this. I don't like how you're setting us free, right? And in chapter 5, verse 21, says, if we go back, you got that on there? Yeah. And they said then, they're talking to Moses, and they're like, the Lord look on you and judge you because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants and have put a sword in their hand to kill us, right? That's when he made them make the bricks without straw. After Moses is like, God's going to set y'all free. And so he goes and tells Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, I'm going to make it worse on them. And they're like, how dare you, Moses? Like, why did you do this? And then in chapter 14, verses 11 and 12, they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Right? 400 years they prayed for this, right? How ungrateful are we sometimes when God answers our prayers not the way we want, and yet we get mad about his answer when we've been asking and asking and asking. He says, this is not what you said in Egypt. Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better of us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. This is right before they're about to cross the Red Sea, and they see the Egyptians coming down on them, right? So they're like, we should have just died in Egypt. Then the next chapter, chapter 15, verse 24, people grumbled against Moses. What shall we drink? There's no water to drink. In 3 days, no water to drink. Then again, last week in chapter 16, verses 2 and 3, when he said, the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And then it says, and the people of Israel said to them, would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. Constantly. If you're not doing it right, it would have been better for us to just been back here in this terrible situation. At least we know what we had. Right? This is a common thing for people to do even today. But we have to remember that God has always, or already in this particular situation, because they're asking for water. It'd be one thing if there was some new situation that came up and there's like a chasm or something they need to cross. And they're like, well, we knew God can part the waters, but how do we get across it? That's not the case. It's not something new. It's something that's already been done, right? They've already been without water, and God provided water. And then he gave them the camp of Elam, where there was 12 springs, 70 palm trees, like plenty. So God has already provided them water in the past. But my question to us this evening is, why is our memory so short? And I generally want to know what you think. Why is our memory so short when God has showed up so many times? Say it again. Because we're ignorant. Okay. Ungrateful. What else? Lack of faith. Short-sighted. We're sheep. Sheep are dumb. I learned about something today called a Judas goat. Have you ever heard of that? You're intrigued now, aren't you? Okay. So a Judas goat is something. It's like, I'll put it to you like this. There used to be a law in Lexington, an old law, where you were not allowed to walk around with ice cream cones in your back pocket. Okay? Does anybody know this? Right? So, right, because the horse thieves would just walk by a horse with that in their back pocket and just go about their day, and that horse is like, and it just follow them out of town. So they didn't officially steal it; it just walked away. So people would take these Judas goats, because Judas betrayed, right? So these Judas goats would be trained essentially, and they would go around all these sheep, and they would lead these sheep out, almost like a shepherd, like a sheepdog, and they'd lead them into these places where they would get pinned, corralled, taken, and then the sheep goat or the Judas goat would jump out, like leaving them to be taken and slaughtered or sheared or whatever. Like he would lead them away, right? Now that I don't know, but possibly. And so we have this. I don't even know where I was going with that, but what were we talking about? Oh yeah, so lack of faith, and so like why are our memories so short? It's because we're very impatient. We are sheep. There's a lot of things that can lead us astray as long as other people are doing it, right? Because somebody in this group had to be the first grumbler. You know what I'm saying? Somebody had to start this wave of grumbling. And the moment you hear somebody else justify your feelings, then you feel the need to express those feelings. I'm not the only one. And so all of a sudden it cascades from there. but we forget what he's done. And Jesus tells them the same thing. There's nothing new under the sun, the Bible tells us. Look at Matthew chapter 14. This has always kind of blown my mind, but yet we all do it. Matthew 14, 19 through 21. You're familiar with the story. Jesus feeds 5,000 men, right, plus women and children with what? 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, right? 5 and 2. Feeds 5,000 men plus all the women, children, etc. So you're looking at probably 10,000 plus people, right? The next chapter, right? So we're not talking like years from then. We're talking about days or weeks. Look in chapter 15, verses 33 through 38. It says, the disciples said to him, where are we going to get enough bread in such a desolate place to feed so great a crowd? Okay, keep in mind, the last chapter, 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, almost 10,000 plus people, okay? And Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? Back up one, John, if you would. They said, we have 7 loaves of bread and a few small fish. Well, listen, a few's more than 2. I learned that in Kara testing when I was in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, right? That a few is 3 or more, right? Several's 4, right? Okay. And so now they've got 3 fish, 7 loaves of bread. That's 7 in sign language. Okay. And so directing the crowd to sit on the ground, right? Just like they did the other time. He took the 7 loaves and the fish, give thanks, broke it, gave it to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the crowds. Guess what? They all ate and were satisfied. They took up 7 baskets full of the broken pieces that were left over. And those that were ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. So this time they had more supplies, less in need, and they still were like, how are we going to do it? Even though the previous chapter they had just done more with less, right? Because they didn't realize the one who was magnifying or was blessing the food and what they had was greater than all those things, right? Because when Jesus offers us his body, because remember, he is the bread from heaven, is his body enough for us every day? Yes. Is his body enough for all those who will partake? Yes. Is there still some left over for anyone else who might come along? Yes. 100%. We see that with the manna. It was sufficient for all them all the time. And yet these people still, their memories, even as disciples' memories were so short. It's because, one, we're impatient. We want it right now, right? J.G. Wentworth, right? It's my money and I want it now. And we just don't trust God. That's really, at the end of the day, it's like, I just don't think he can do it again. I don't think he can come through again. I don't know that he can do it. We don't trust him. So Moses, like anybody I think would rationally understand, he's like, God, what do I do? What do I do with these people? Like, what do I do with them? And so we're back in verse 3. It says, the people thirsted for water, and the people grumbled against Moses, said, why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? That's always their go-to, isn't it? Every time they don't have something like, Moses, you just want to kill us, don't you? You just want us to die. And so Moses cries to the Lord. He's like, what shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me. All right? And the Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. Isn't it cool that what God started with Moses, he's still using that, right? Well, I think a lot of times we want to change and update and do all this stuff, but sometimes the old stuff is still good stuff, right? So he's still using the same staff that he used back in the Nile when he touched the Nile and it turned into blood, and he's used it for several things along the way, right? The Red Sea, etc. And God's like, all right, take that staff that I gave you, and I want you to go towards Oreb, okay? And so he says, you're going to, behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Oreb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. Again, nothing God tells him throughout all of this makes any sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing that a logical person would be like, that makes perfect sense because I know there's so much water that's stored up in a rock. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this doesn't make any rational sense. But sometimes faith does not need to be rationalized. It just needs to be trusted because God is supernatural. He's not natural, he's supernatural. If he can make everything out of nothing, he can bring water out of a rock. Right? If he's in control of the elements, if he's in control of every little molecule, he can do it. Okay? And so we see that Moses goes, Moses did, so he's learned at this point, just do it. Just do what God says, and he'll take care of it. So Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Now, it doesn't tell us, but why do you think he took the elders? Witnesses, right? Again, because God, every miracle God does, whether it's healing, I'm talking even now, healing, provision, whatever it may be, it's not for us. It's always for His glory. Everything He does is for His glory. So it's not just a matter of Him going to Moses and be like, all right, you do this, and then you get all this glory for it. No, I want them to see so they can go back and tell their people, because the people looked at their elders, all these tribes looked at their elders as authorities, right? And again, all the people are grumbling, so if they're grumbling, who's also grumbling? The elders. They're not stepping up and being like, listen, be quiet. God's provided for us all this time. They're grumbling too. So bring the leaders with you, and guess what happens? When they see God's provision, what are they now going to tell their people? God's there. So that's you see what I'm saying? So it's like this trickle down effect that it's going to get everybody through the authority that's given them. Yeah, I mean, I think we all need that from time to time. I mean, it amazes me, even for myself, that God will answer a prayer, or He'll show up, He'll do something, and I'm still just dumbfounded. I'm like, how do you do that? I can't believe I doubted. Why did I not just believe? He's done that before. You know, like we all find ourselves in this moment where we have to remind ourselves that He is who He says He is. He says, so Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place, and this is a smack in the face. I just want to say this, okay? And he calls the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, right? Massah means testing, and Meribah means quarreling, right? And because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? So he names this because of the people's complaining. Can you imagine, like, you think about like Paintsville, you go back and look at the history, it has something to do with Paint Creek, and they saw there was like Indian painting on the stone around the creek, and all, like, so there's always some sort of history as to why places get their names, you know, like Horse Picture Branch, I can only imagine, you know, why it's called that. Like, can you imagine you're rolling up on this place and you're like, what's this place called? It's called Complaining. You know what I'm saying? Like, why? Just guess, you know, because Israel complained so much that Moses was like, this is it. God's going to provide for you right now, but I am going to name this place after your griping, right? So what an indictment to them that is called that. And so he provides for them yet again. And so now we're going to have this first kind of shift in the story of their journey, because they're free, but they're not free, right? They're free, but they're not home free, if that makes sense. They've not made it to the promised land yet. You're going to see in the book of Joshua that they have to fight all kinds of enemies to actually obtain and keep the promised land. They don't just walk in like, hey, it's ours. They have to actually like do some stuff. And so up to this point, their only battles have been against the elements, really. Needing food, needing water, needing shelter. They've had no issues from anybody outside of this, right? Because their enemies, the Egyptians, what happened to them? They drowned, right? God destroyed all of them when the Red Sea fell on them, right? So their enemies were gone. And all of a sudden, we're about to see a new enemy arrive who is going to be their enemy basically throughout the rest of the Old Testament, okay? And so we see here in verse 8, it says, then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, who is Amalek? Esau's grandson, okay? So if you go to Genesis 36, verse 12, I know I gave you that answer on there. Good student, reading the directions. All right, in Genesis chapter 36, verse 12, so it says, Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz. Now, Eliphaz was one of Esau's sons, and Esau had quite a few sons. But she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. So he is the product of Esau's grandson and a concubine, right? And so if you know Esau and Jacob, right, their story, right? Esau was the first, but he traded in his birthright to Jacob for some stew, right? And there was animosity between them in general from that time on, right? And so we know Jacob becomes Israel, right? But like the Moabites, the Edomites, and the Amalekites all come from Esau, right? So you have Israel and the tribes of Israel. You have Esau and all these others who are against Israel, constantly fighting against them, right? All stemming back to this. But that even goes back even farther, right? Because not just this branch, but if you go back one more, right? You have, see, Abraham has Isaac and Jacob, right? So, I'm sorry, so he has Isaac and Ishmael, right? So Jacob, or Israel's dad, he has a brother that's against him, and that's where you get like Muslims and people like that today. And so constant fighting against God's people based on different decisions that they have made. And so it says that Amalek, doesn't tell why, it just says he came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses says to Joshua, and remember, Joshua's kind of Moses' right-hand man, right? He's his number one, okay? He says, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. Like, I just feel like there had to be some other, there had to be some more information shared here in this conversation than what's given to us. You know what I'm saying? Like all right, Adam, and you go out and fight with them, and I'm going to stay on that hill with a stick in my hand. And Adam's like, all right, we're going to win. You know, like there had to be some other explanation, like God will fight for us, God will provide for us, but it doesn't give us that. But we just see that Joshua's like, all right, I'll do it. Okay, and do what? Facts.
Go hunt the stick on the hill. Yeah, this is awesome. They've already seen the stick.
Can you imagine the Amalekites are like, oh no, he's got the stick on the hill. All right. But see, sometimes it's the little things. Like God uses the foolishness to confound the wise. You know, these people have swords and all this other stuff, and Moses has a stick, right? But Moses has God. Just like Goliath has all these swords and spears and all this, and David has a slingshot. You know, so it's all about who's on your side. And so it says that, so Joshua did as Moses told him, and he fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So Hur, H-U-R, Hur, that is Miriam's son. Okay, so Miriam is Moses and Aaron's sister. So Hur is their nephew, okay? Hur is their nephew. That is just messed my head up for a second, okay? Hur, the guy, is their nephew, okay? All right. So that's what Ben-Hur, Ben-Hur, Ben means son. So Ben-Hur is the son of Hur, right? If that makes sense, okay? All right. So it goes on and says, but whenever Moses held up his hands, okay, Israel prevailed. But whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. Okay? And so just imagine this going on. Like they're up on this hill overlooking this battle, right? And as long as his hands are up there, it's like they're making ground, they're moving, they're winning. And as his arms are getting tired, because there's not a single one of us that could hold that stick out like this for hours. Just straight like this. Even the world's strongest man couldn't do that forever, right? And at some point, his arms are starting to get weak, and they fall, and all of a sudden the enemy starts to advance. And so because his hands were growing weary, they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it. So while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, so his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Like how cool if you had like to be able to see that happen. I mean, which we get this like vision here of it, because you're going to see in a minute. He tells them to write it down so Joshua can hear about it, because Joshua's in the battle. You know what I'm saying? Like he's not up there watching, like, is the stick up? He's not watching that. He's fighting, right? And how often is it for us? We don't know what God's doing behind us. So we don't know how that's working and who's praying for us and who's going to bat for us. We just know we have to keep fighting. We have to keep doing what we're told to do. Because he didn't tell Joshua, pay attention to me up there. He didn't say, go up and help me. He said, you go fight, and here's what I'll do. Each of us has our responsibilities, right? And when both of us do our responsibilities, God shows up in a big way. And so imagine seeing this go down, that Hur and Aaron are like, we got to do something. Let's have him sit down. And as he sits down, he's like, I got this arm. I got this arm. Like, I can do this for a long time. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can hold his arm like that for a long time. And Moses can do what? Rest. He can just rest, right? And so it is so vital that we catch that in this story. And it says, so then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it to the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Now, what do you think that means? I'll utterly blot out them. No one will remember them. He blots them out from under heaven. They won't exist anymore, right? They will not exist. And guess what? There's no Amalekites today. There's none, right? And we'll show that in just a minute. But he says that thou utterly blot them out of memory from Amalek from under heaven. So Moses built an altar and called the name of it, the Lord is my banner, saying a hand upon the throne of the Lord. And the the Hebrew word for throne there looks very similar to the one for banner. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And so God's going to fight against these wicked people, and that means the wicked people are going to fight against God and his people, right? This is constant. So we see this theme throughout Scripture. And so if we're looking at our worksheet, especially let's look at the back page for a second. Okay? So he went up the hill with Aaron and Hur, and when he held up his hands, Israel prevailed. If he dropped them or lowered them, then Amalek prevailed. But like most of us, we began to grow weary. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in a couple weeks in a sermon, but rest is so vital for the Christian. It's so vital for the Christian. I heard a guy say it the other day that, I can't remember who shared this with me, and it might have been one of you in here, but the guy was like, I'm so busy all the time. I'm doing the Lord's work. I'm doing the Lord's work. And someone said, why don't you rest? And he's like, because the devil doesn't rest. And he said, the devil's not your role model. Jesus is. And Jesus rested, right? The devil's busy all the time because he has to be. We're supposed to be intentional, not busy, as Christians, right? And rest is intentional. You have to choose to do that because our world definitely doesn't encourage it. It encourages go, go, go because the prince of this world is trying to distract you. And so he grows weary, so they put a rock under him to sit on. The two men hold each arm. So Moses' arms were up until the sun went down. Therefore, Joshua defeated Amalek. So my question to you in regards to this particular interaction, this situation of the battle, what can we learn from this specific event as Christians? We have to help each other. We have to hold each other up. The Lord will fight for us, but we can't do it ourselves. Trust. Anybody else? True. True. So let's look at this as a holistic thing here. So if you're talking about the people of Israel, who went out to battle? Joshua and what? Right. Not all the men, right? It just says choose for us men, like just choose some men and go out and fight, right? So that means there's probably were some men who didn't go fight, but they had things that they still had to do at home because it wasn't like the battle happened in a couple hours. And so they had things they had to do at home. The women weren't chosen to go do this because why? They had things to do at home. They had things to take care of. But then Moses doesn't go down there and fight, but it's because he had things to do. What about Aaron and Hur? Why didn't they go down and fight? Because they had something different to do, right? And so too often we want to do somebody else's role, right? What if Joshua had been like, I know you want me to fight, but I'd rather come up here and hold your arms, right? They needed Joshua to lead the battle, right? That's what they needed. And he needed his family up there to hold his arms up. And so when we recognize that everyone has a role to play, then all of a sudden we can start stepping into those roles as opposed to being like, well, why does he get to do this? Or why does she get to do that? Well, why can't I? And it's like, why are you asking? Why aren't you just doing what he's asked you to do? And that's what we can gather from this, and that, bless you. And especially your leaders need this help because though we can look at this story and be like, Moses just had to hold a stick. Those people were fighting for their lives, right? But Moses' leadership was his ability to lead and be in the right place to do the right thing was what indicated or dictated the battle for them, right? And so it's even more important that you are praying for your leaders, that you're upholding your leaders, that you're encouraging your leaders and not tearing them down Because what if they're like, oh, you're stronger than that, Moses, you big sissy, pick your arms up. Like, how's that going to help? Yeah.
So I agree wholeheartedly with what you just said. There's nothing in the Bible before that said Joshua was a great swordsman. Nothing. There's nothing, okay, in captivity for 430 years that said they ever did anything like that. But God saw that ability in Joshua. That's why Joshua was able to do that.
You know, and
That's why others did what they did.
and it's really interesting. So if you notice, just to kind of jump ahead for a second, it says when they go scout out the promised land, right? And he sends them out, and they look, and these spies go out and look, and Joshua and Caleb are two of the spies, and they see these Nephilim, they see these giants, and they're like, we're like grasshoppers, we're toast. Except for Joshua and Caleb, they're like, we can take them. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't because they were like, we're superior, but they're like, we can get them. So it was something about their character. But they also weren't in charge. Because notice when Moses dies at the beginning of Joshua, and Joshua's handed the reins, you're the guy now, God has to tell him repeatedly in chapter 1, be strong and courageous. Right? Why? Up to that point, he was. He was, but all of a sudden his position changed. You know what I'm saying? Like he's now in a different role, and it's like, it's on me now? You know what I mean? Like, because at the end of the day, he didn't have to take all the heat. Moses and Aaron were taking all that heat, right? Never said the Israelites grumbled against Joshua. Joshua's just like, oh gosh, that stinks right now for you, Moses, you know? But now he's the guy. And he has to be reminded of why God chose him in the first place. Like, he's the guy who's going to lead them past this point. And this is why. Be strong and courageous because I am with you. Every time he was bold, it wasn't because he thought he could win. It's because he knew God was there. And so that's the reminder in Joshua as we go forward. All right, so he tells Moses to write as a memorial in a book and then recite to Joshua that God will drive out Amalek from under heaven. So I want to jump you up to Deuteronomy where we see this kind of play out again. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 17 through 19, essentially, God is basically like, no, it's not the same, but he essentially put out a bounty on the Amalekites. Like, they're not going to make it. Like, I'm going to get rid of them, okay? And so in Deuteronomy 25, verses 17 through 19, notice what he says here. He says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt. That's what story we're reading right now, right? Amalek came and attacked them as they were coming out of Egypt, right? He says, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind you, and he did not fear God, right? So that means there were Israelites who died because of this. Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around you, in the land that the Lord your God has given you for an inheritance to possess, the promised land, Canaan, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget, right? That's exactly what he was told to do, and recite this to Joshua, okay? And you'll see as we get there, Joshua and his armies do these very things. Like, they do these very things, okay? And so then Moses built an altar and called it, the Lord is my banner. And the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And so I'm going to jump ahead of Leighton a little bit for Sunday school here in Judges chapter 10. In Judges chapter 10, the Lord said to the people of Israel, okay, so this is after their this would be before their kings. So before their kings, they had these judges that would take care of them and would guide them and lead them and fight for them, etc. It says, the Lord said to the people of Israel, did I not save you from the Egyptians and the Amorites, from the Ammonites and from the Philistines? And he says, the Sidonians also and the Amalekites and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods, therefore I will serve you or save you no more. So in the book of Judges, he's reminding them, did I not do this? Did I not save you from them? Did I not bless you, get you away from them? But he is going to fight against them from generation to generation. So in 1 Samuel chapter 15, and so again, if God promises something, what can we do? We can bank on it. We can take it to the bank, right? In 1 Samuel 15, verses 7 through 8, and this is after Judges, right? Samuel was a prophet at the end of the Judges. Okay? And so it says, Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive and devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. So if you've, I don't know, has anybody in here watched the, on Prime Video, The House of David? Anybody seen part of it? Have you seen this scene in the first episode? The first episode shows this scene where Samuel comes in, the prophet Samuel, and he's a raggedy-looking old dude, right? And he comes in to talk to King Agag, or to talk to Saul, and Saul's got King Agag, like, chained up at his feet and, like, groveling like an animal, and he's proud of it. But if you know anything about the story, Samuel told him that God said, you need to kill everything. Destroy all the Amalekites. Do not take their animals. Kill all their animals. Kill all their people. Kill the king. This is your job. All right? And so instead, Saul kills almost all of them, but he doesn't eradicate. Because remember, what was God going to do? He promised, they're not going to exist anymore. And Saul was like, well, I'll kill most of them, and I'll keep him at my feet as a trophy. Right? And that's when Samuel comes in there and is like, your mother's going to, cry because she's childless, and he, like, cuts his head off, right? That's a prophet right there, right? And it's a powerful scene in the movie, like, if you see it, and then Saul goes mad, like, goes crazy. So we see that scene there. And in verse 20 of that same book, it says, Saul said to Samuel, I've obeyed the voice of the Lord. I've gone on the mission which the Lord sent me. I brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I devoted the Amalekites to destruction. That's not what God's sending to do. That's not what God sent him to do. He was supposed to come back with nothing. Nobody. No thing. He's supposed to kill them all. Eradicate them. And he didn't. So later in 1 Samuel chapter 27, verses 8 through 9, David is now up, right? David is the new king after Saul. It says, now David and his men went up and made raids against the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. So they still exist. And for these were the inhabitants of the land from of old, as far as Shur to the land of Egypt, right? It says, and David would strike the land and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the garments, and came back to Achish. Then later in chapter 30, David again. It says, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. That's a terrible name. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. The Amalekites are still there. Verse 17 of the same chapter. David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. That's a long time. Okay? And not a man of them escaped except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. Right? So there's 400 young men of these Amalekites that survived. Right? 400 that made it away. Right? And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe God just let a little bit go. Look at 1 Chronicles chapter 4. 1 Chronicles chapter 4, this is when King Hezekiah is in charge, okay? And it says, and some of them, 500 men of the Simeonites. So Simeon was one of the tribes of Israel, right? So these are 500 of his men. They went to Mount Seir, having as their leaders Pelatiah, Neriah, Rephaiah, and Uzziel, the sons of Ishi, right? And look at what they did in the next verse. It says, and they defeated the remnant of the Amalekites who had escaped. Right? So those 400 that had escaped, it says they defeated them, the ones that had lived there to this day. And so guess what happened? They're gone. They're gone. So God came through with his promise. He's like, I will fight against them, okay, and I will have war on them generation after generation. And so I'm going to go back to the front page for just a second, if you would. That in this scene, I'm going to back up. I kind of skipped over something. In the scene where they're at the beginning of our chapter, where they're coming up to the rock and they're getting water out of the rock, etc., and they're asking for water, and they're in the middle of the desert, and they're like, where are we going to get this water? And God provides it from them, and he tells him that if he hits this rock, water will flow out. Now, I told you I was going to bring you a picture of that, and the more I studied on it, I could not confirm that it was the right thing, so I'm not going to show it to you, right? Because I didn't want to have to go back and retract and be like, that's not the real rock, but there is a rock around this area, but it's possibly in the wrong area in that area, if that makes sense. It's supposed to be on the east, but it's on the west or something like that. But it's split in half. Like, it's a rock that's got a crack down, a huge rock, got a crack down the middle of it. It looks like there could have been some, like, water erosion on the rocks beneath it. Possible. It's possible, but I didn't want to show it to you because I couldn't confirm it. Okay, that's just for me. But I do want to point this out. So in Psalm chapter 78, verse 16, we're going up to King David writing back about this, right? So we're going past our time looking back. And he says that God made streams come out of the rock and caused waters to flow down like rivers. And so we see that even those who came after this, hundreds of years after Moses, is looking back and claiming this event as a true event, that it really happened in time. But what's cool about this, and what I guess my question to you is, how can we see Jesus in this scene of them being in the wilderness, looking for water, finding it here? How can we see Jesus in this? We talked about last week, we saw Jesus is the bread of life. He is the bread from heaven. He is the manna. But how do we see Jesus in this? He's the rock, the cornerstone. He's the living water. Out of him, fountains of living water flow. How else? Listen to how Paul sees this event. Okay, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. So again, anytime someone says, oh, the New Testament and the Old Testament don't have any connection, Jesus wasn't in the Old Testament, that's not true. They're either saying that out of ignorance or on purpose, right? It's just not true, okay? So Paul's writing to this church, and he says, I don't want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers, was talking about their lineage, the Jewish lineage, okay, the Israelites, were all under the cloud, right? What cloud? The pillar of cloud that led them through the day, right? And all passed through the sea. What sea? The Red Sea. So we're in Exodus right now. Does everybody agree with me on that? Like, we're in Exodus. He says, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, right? They're following their leader. They're believing on him. They're following after him. And all ate the same spiritual food, which was what? The manna from heaven. Now listen. And all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them. And that rock was Christ. So the rock that they drank from, that he split open, the rock that was struck and broken so that water poured out, was Christ. And is that not right? Is that what we see? That when Christ was struck, the sheep scattered. But when he was struck, when he was killed and he was broken, living water came from him, because he said, you will get this living water, speaking of who? The Holy Spirit. That once he was broken, the Holy Spirit would come, and that would be the living water that would flow in people. And so again, we see this foreshadowing back then, and here's Paul telling them, that was Jesus. Jesus was the rock from which they drank. That was the spiritual drink that they had right then, the drink that came from nothing. They had no other hope. There was no other option. There was no other water they could get. God had to provide the water. There's no salvation we can get. There's no forgiveness we can get. There's no wholeness we can get unless God provides it. And so we see this all the way back then in the Exodus. Is that not cool? Like, it's a beautiful picture of Scripture right there. So, any comments or questions about tonight's Bible study? About chapter 17.
You know what? They should just try to get along. They're cousins. And I got a young lesson. But if you go back.
Oh, they're definitely. I mean,
they're
I mean, literally come from stepbrothers, really, from half brothers. From half brothers, yeah. All right. So, anybody else? Johnny.
Moses had a different kind of faith than his disciples did.
Very true.
His disciples, after Christ died, so we're different.
No, that's true. That's true. Because the only thing about Moses is Moses never entered the promised land. You know, Jesus became the way to the promised land. You know, and so yeah. But he definitely did have a different type of faith than his followers did. But I think that was necessary, because you have to have that one person or people who are setting the example of what to follow after. Like, just like Jesus is our example, we will never reach it, but that is our goal. Like, that is what we're trying to do, is be like him. you know. So he sets that example. Anybody else?
Going back to Moses, standing there, with his hands in the air, going up and down. To me, this is, Moses is interceding. And you see that, of his own, he's not able to constantly intercede.
Mm.
So he grows weak and he needs help from other people. But, and I said, I'm looking for here, it's in Hebrews 7:25. Says, therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus never gets weak. He
Mhm.
is always interceding for us, so there is always victory in him. This
Right.
just illustrates his power.
That's true. That's true. So like the idea of hands being up biblically, right? So we have worship, right? Adoration. We have victory, right? We also have that we're supposed to pray with, it says men everywhere should lift up holy hands. That has nothing to do with like your favorite song coming on and you'd be like, that's nothing to do with that. Lifting up holy hands means clean hands, that you are doing holy deeds, that your works are pure before the Lord, and so you're lifting it up in prayer to him, coming to him boldly because you're trying to live that life that's righteous before him. So everything about hands being up is all about God's glory. It's all about God's glory. And so it's like you can kind of see this take place in here. It's like as it falls, so do the people. When we stop glorifying God, we kind of fall along with them. But it is a powerful visual in this whole scene of what's going on. So, anybody else? All hearts and minds clear? As my sociology teacher would say, any comments, complaints, or questions? Yes. Which one?
I don't know. I was just trying to say something I didn't want to blurt out. Anyways, but Moses was definitely better than I would have been, because at that point with all the complaining, I would have been like, I know they're asking, but like, I feel like this time you don't have time. I can't take care of it, leave them be.
Yeah.
Because I was,
Joshua, you go down there and fight, and I'm going to go up on this hill. Yeah. About that, I'm going to take a nap. Good luck. Yeah. But that goes to Moses owning his responsibility, though. Like he was supposed to lead. But yeah, it would be easy for us to look at this and be like, why is he putting up with this? Like, why didn't he and why doesn't he do something better? Why does he keep dealing with them? But again, that's a reflection of God with us. And one thing I will tell you is that even though the Amalekites may not be a recognized people group anymore, there's most certainly, these are all foreshadows of realities in the New Testament, that there's always a people fighting against God's people. Always. And so we have two kingdoms at work all the time, God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom. And he will constantly be at war, the Bible says, with the people of God. Constantly. And so we have to be attentive to that. We have to make sure that we're doing what we have to do, okay? All right, anybody else before we dismiss tonight? All right. Are there anything else before we dismiss tonight?
You say you talk to doctors?
Well, we'll certainly pray for him, for sure. Mm. Yeah. She's writing that down. I do want to tell y'all, we'll have something out tomorrow, hopefully, to advertise for this, but on May 31st, it's a Saturday here at the church, we're going to be having a outdoor food worship time, where we got music from multiple people in groups from 12 to 5-ish. We're going to have food trucks on site, the opportunity for you just to come and fellowship and worship with other churches and other members. That'll be going on May 31st, so we'll try to make plans to be here for that day. So, yeah. Okay, and the sign-up sheet for the luncheon, which is this Saturday, okay, is out. You got it with you, or is it out there? Oh, she got it right there. Okay. So if you want to do that, get that from her. All right. While she's writing that down, we'll get this after we're done. Does anybody else have anything today before we close in prayer? Good? You got it? Okay. All right, well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, God, we thank you so much for this day. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that we can see ourselves in the habits and issues that are going on in there, Lord. And we just pray, Lord, that you would help us to trust you more, that you'd help us to walk out our faith, God, even if it's the size of a mustard seed, because you are big enough for all things. God, we ask that you would forgive us for our shortcomings, forgive us for our sins, but Lord, drive us to do more, to be better, that you would continue to change us from the inside out, God, that it's not just about behavior, but it's about a heart change. God, we ask that you just watch over all those who are here, all those who have requests on their heart, all those who are struggling, who are sick, who are hurting, God. We just ask that you would move in those situations for your glory and your praise. God, we ask all these things through and by the name of your Son, Jesus. And everyone said,